Hello and welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the Historical Humans podcast. My name is Justin Woods, and I'm joined today by my fellow co-hosts, Colum Coleman and Aaron Gilpin. And today we are doing a topic that I have been lobbying for years now, something that is of great importance to me, and it is the
Is it yogurt?
No, it is the
Damn.
Hopewell Mound Builders, one of the most American things to be ever invented, because out of all the places on Earth, the United States, specifically the Midwest, is home to one of the coolest subcultures of mound building.
He talks about this as if we have somehow been preventing him from doing this for 3 years, and not he hasn't put it on the roster himself.
Hey, it was on that list since day one.
It was on the list since day one, but like some of the other things that are coming up this year, none of us actually put it forward as get this on the schedule docket until now. We get to talk about the Hopewell Mound Builders, which is honestly a very interesting subject, and one which was surprisingly hard to get good detailed information on, which really disappointed me, because these are a foundational people for the history of North America. They are a cornerstone to it. This is like ignoring them is the equivalent of taking ancient Greece out of any talk of Europe. They're very important for this, which brings us to sort of when they were and where they were. They lived as a sort of culture from about 200 BCE to 500 CE. So Jesus. Yeah, you got to bring people in with that word, or scare them off. Either will do.
It really holds a large importance, especially in indigenous North American culture, when you look at how diverse this ended up being and how expansive it was, because the Hopewell had lands that ranged as far as, that you could see evidence of them being there, from Michigan, Wisconsin, Indiana, Illinois, Iowa, Kansas, Pennsylvania, New York. I mean, that's a good majority of the eastern Midwest of the United States. But they centered primarily around one state that I did not mention in that list, which is Ohio.
Yep.
H-O.
Yeah.
I-O.
Yeah. The Hopewell were basically the Union during the Civil War.
Oh,
that's about the same size of it. That's about the same territory.
Hold on.
The same.
There's a conspiracy in there we have to unwrap. The Hopewell fought the Civil War.
Hopewell were the Union.
Oh my God.
Who have they been fighting?
The Southern Indians, the Cherokee, the Choctaw, and the Chickasaw.
Yeah. This is so wrong.
But mildly historically accurate, because those tribes did fight for the Confederacy.
Yeah.
What? Hold on.
We're so demonetized.
Wait. Oh my God, I'm teaching Aaron so much today.
I don't remember that part.
But one of the things that it ties together and why they're so expansive is North America, beyond just being a wide open expanse for most of its interior, has a lot of wide navigable rivers and a lot of areas where you could easily portage your canoe through shallower waters or over land. So you see, especially when there's a map of the territories that they control, you can see the network and web of rivers and waterways and lakes that they would use as just a super highway. And that's one of the things that I love about the Hopewell specifically, because their mound building was so unique. You can see the cultural diffusion of this idea and how it actually just basically trickled throughout the rest of the country. Well, what is the modern day country, but out through the rest of North America, specifically up and down the Mississippi River, which leads them to later be called the Mississippian culture. But that's jumping a little too far.
That's a successor culture. The Hopewell, as we understand them, get their name from what is known as the Hopewell Farm in Ross County, Ohio. Now, this is where the first major excavation and investigation of a Hopewell Mound occurred. This happened in 1891. People had begun looking into this as Europeans and later as Americans.
Right, because I
During the
remember.
yeah
I remember
during
reading
the
they used to
17th.
because they
Yeah.
used to
Please
say
do let
they
me.
used to think the Welsh or like the Irish came out there and built them.
Yeah, there were all sorts of weird Jesus conspiracy theories going on about this. But
This is
basically,
why we say all
we,
aliens, like alien, like conspiracy theories, are based in white supremacy
and
because when they
yeah,
couldn't say when they could definitively not prove that white people didn't build that,
yeah,
then the alien craze took over back in the
yeah,
50s.
and
yeah,
that's really where a lot of it is based out of is the white supremacy ideals, and then also what a lot of the early scientists didn't quite understand or realize is that cultures can rise and fall, and they can come into prominence and fall out of prominence. So when they arrive, they see a bunch of hunter gatherers without
yeah,
many permanent settlements and go, oh, they clearly didn't build this.
yeah.
Which is so
But
funny because they completely forgot their own historical context of
yeah,
having
yeah,
experienced something like that.
yeah. Charlemagne,
All of them.
the Romans, everything.
But a
But
lot
yeah,
of those sites had continuous habitation even after the fall. In
Yeah.
North America, it wasn't so much. They tended to migrate and to change depending on seasons and localities.
yeah. Turns out when you don't build mega cities everywhere, there's a ton of freaking open space.
I just like to think about it in the way of like they didn't have one main residence. They had a bunch of holiday residences. You know, when it
Yeah.
started getting cold up north, they go down
That
south.
Or like
that
they would
actually is
it's
the
not
that actually is
also
the Hopewell settlement pattern. It's
oh
semi
wow.
no is yeah, the Hopewell
Yeah.
we'll get into details later, but the Hopewell were semi nomadic.
Yeah, they
Yeah.
would
But
travel depending on seasons
yeah,
and depending on what foods were in season
yeah,
at that point.
yeah. There's more later. Right now we're talking about the discovery, heavy air quotes there, of the Hopewell.
But
Right,
this
right.
led
Which
to a lot of intellectual conversation and early archaeological debate because
yep,
this also tied into the time where America also started really dabbling into imperialism.
yep,
And that it tends to open up a lot of other discussions and debates, but it
Yeah.
leads to this culture of it very much is academic and scholarly in nature, but it's a very pseudo scholarly
yeah.
because of what ideas permeated at the time.
Yeah, like for context, the like first concerted excavation here at Hopewell, which is where the Hopewell all get their name. This was 1891. This is Gilded Age America, post Civil War, massive industrialism, massive accumulation of wealth at the exploitation of literally anything within reach.
And even the archaeology sites at that point were exploited in such a way where they would effectively just shovel through anything that wasn't a beautiful object that they could then display.
Yeah,
And, you know, thankfully for them, they happened across a burial mound, which
yeah,
had a lot of grave goods and human remains located inside that they would then either sell to private collectors or what they love to do around this time is to donate them to their nearest institution to have the next great American museum. This is how a lot of the Field Museum in Chicago or the Natural History Museum in New York got their collections.
yeah. Well, this is how Dixon Mounds came to exist, and anyone who knows that name knows what a nightmare it was.
Dixon Mounds, for those who are unaware, they basically lopped off the top portion of the burial mound, put a giant plexiglass floor in place, and let you go in so you can view the bodies in situ,
Yeah.
just from beneath a looking glass.
Stand on the graves of your ancestors. That's not offensive in any culture.
And also stand on the glass of not your ancestors.
Yeah, it's mainly not your ancestors, and they were very happy to do so for the right cost. Granted, this has been changed since I want to say the late '80s or '90s.
Yeah, this
Okay.
this did get capped off. You can no longer come and stand and look down into the open graves.
Okay.
But just yikes all around, man.
Yeah, but anyway, on a little bit of a lighter note,
Like, mommy,
Bit of a
look at that
funny thing
skeleton.
happened
Like,
in
who thought that'd be
1891.
a fun idea?
A bit of a funny thing. When they excavated these mounds, they didn't understand the concept that more than one group of people could come up with the idea of stack earth over thing. So
See, this is what we're
they
saying.
they attributed uh everything to the Hopewell, like every earthenwork in America ended up getting initially attributed to the Hopewell, and they became known in all the publications not simply as the Hopewell people, but as the Hopewell Mound Builders, which is a misnomer because prior to the Hopewell, you have the Adena, who are mound builders, and after the Hopewell, you have the Mississippians, who are mound builders, and these are very distinct cultures based on what they're using the mounds for, the size and shape of the mounds, and all the artifacts we find in and around them. But it just always tickles me a little bit when we have to keep calling them the Hopewell Mound Builders, and this is like calling the Americans the American grave diggers, because only Americans dig graves. It doesn't track. It doesn't
Yeah.
track, and it's just weirdly hilarious.
It just also goes to show how little a lot of the early Americans and even the early colonials knew of indigenous cultures at the time. And it's really honestly quite funny because and I get a kick out of this because a lot of the descending communities actually had pretty good histories of these other groups that came before them, even if they may not have even interacted or even potentially descended directly from. Indigenous oral traditions and oral histories pass that information down. So the Americans are like, we have no idea. And then the indigenous are like, oh yeah, there are the mounds that our ancestors built.
Yep. Which, fun fact about that, when the Americans first came into the Ohio Valley in the 1700s and started encountering all these mounds, they asked some of the local tribes, like the Shawnee, what they were, and the Shawnee would not tell them, which led all the Americans to start thinking they must not know. I mean, how could they? They don't write their history. Racism. So this led to a lot of invention of like hyper intelligent, super advanced white people living in Ohio, and then mysteriously
It's Ohio.
That already itself is an oxymoron.
Yeah, yeah, and then mysteriously dying off, presumably because the local people who kept saying, "I don't know what that is, go away," murdered them, and we're trying to cover up the fact that they murdered them.
Well,
because remember, we need a reason to get this land.
Also talking about how we have everything is cyclical and that stories and stuff prevail. A lot of the tribes in New England and on the eastern seaboard would tell the European settlers about what they had that was important or what was valuable to them. And you know what the Europeans did?
Stole it.
They would either steal it or intentionally vandalize it. So that way they had specific feelings and specific thoughts, and that was passed down.
It's almost like people still do that to their graves today.
Yeah.
One of the fun things about this is we got a lovely little duo here in the 1840s, who I will be referring to as E&E. It's Ephraim Squire and Edwin Davis. And during this time, in the lead up to the Civil War, these two gentlemen decided it would be a great idea to go around and just map all these weird hills and mounds and things and just see where they are and map them out. So this massive survey gets undertaken by these two individuals, and they actually get it published in the 1848 edition of a Smithsonian article. It's the Ancient Monuments of the Mississippi Valley. And it's actually a pretty good catalog, because what these two men were they were cartographers. So they just set out to map where these things were relative to each other and what they were. They didn't set out to, dynamite them, which is what a lot of people were doing, and would continue to do up through World War II.
I mean, to be fair to them, archaeology wasn't really developed as a field at this point, and a lot of archaeology's roots come from cartographers, mappers, because, hey, who notices the anomalies in the earth more than mappers? And it would just start off like that, or it would start off like the Dilettante, or even with the original archaeology survey here, a bunch of rich white guys who have time, money, and an interest in the finer things in life, like history instead of survival.
Yep. And one of the nice things here, one of the things that like is really nice about this little survey done by E&E is that it actually preserves for us most of the sites, most of the mounds, because a lot of them don't exist anymore, including a number of ones that are actually very famous today. The only reason we know the full extent of those sites is because of this survey, because so much of it would get destroyed between 1848 and 1950.
That sucks.
Yeah, as the Ohio, becomes much more densely populated, people start pushing these weird hills out of the way that are getting in the way of their landscaping projects.
This is why Ohio is the way it is.
Yep. Yep.
Like
And,
they destroyed an entire people's like mound culture, and
yeah.
now it is hell.
Now it is corn. Now it is corn. And it always will be.
Which state did Children of the Corn take place in?
Corn and golf courses, and that's
Well, so it's kind of like layered, like it's like a little bit more industrial towards the lake,
Yeah.
than suburban, than rural.
And a big part of why everything gets destroyed is because the Hopewell had this really strange habit of building things along waterways. They loved rivers.
It makes sense.
And guess who else loves rivers? All of
Europeans.
humanity. So so all these settlements are along waterways. So when people moved in and there was no one to significantly defend this, they just moved in on top.
I mean, I get it. Like that's just gonna happen.
Yeah.
But also, it still sucks. I'm just frustrated.
Yeah, this is very much this is a very angry one from us here. Like we're just mad or disappointed in almost everything I'm going to bring up. Which is why, in order to maintain that energy of disappointment and anger, we're going to need a well-balanced diet, which the Hopewell really seemed to have down. They were a mix of farmers and hunter-gatherers. They fished, they hunted, they gathered wild fruits and berries, and they also farmed corn and squash and beans. And oh dear God, they were basically Ohio as Ohio is now.
I mean, there's a reason why America's really good at growing those things specifically, but one of the big things with that is that's known as the Three Sisters or the Triumvirate. And they're one of the most like broken farming tactics, and it's truly a shame we don't utilize it to this day, because they would plant all three plants in the exact same hole. They would plant corn, beans, and squash, and what would happen is the corn would grow and the stalks would give a place for the beans to grow up, the bean stalks. You would get squash that would have their wide-reaching leaves that would protect against weeds and other growth, and per acre you get some of the highest density of calories.
Yep.
The problem is it would destroy the market. Like it would absolutely flood the market so much more that it would like unless you had a strict monopoly
Yeah.
to like keep prices artificially high.
But that is one of the biggest things why a lot of tribes and a lot of groups in America were very self-sustaining because it was really good.
Yeah. They had this, like, that's just 2,000 years ago. They had mastered, or at least developed, one of the most effective farming strategies, and these people aren't even full-time farmers. They're hunter gatherers. They do every subsistence strategy available to them.
Do we have any information on their trade networks?
Oh, absolutely. Their
Is
trade
Oh
that
yeah.
networks.
is this the group culture that had like the tiny little bladelets that didn't really seem to have a function, but it's like they collected them?
So
Oh, I don't know about
the
the blade
Hopewell
lists, but
specifically would trade all across North America. They would trade for obsidian from Wyoming and Montana. They would get copper from northern Wisconsin and Michigan. They would get shark teeth from the Gulf of Mexico. They would get all these materials and they would be traded along the rivers, and you can see it based on the dispersal of what was there. And Aaron, I do think that it was one of the mound cultures that had the collection because
yeah.
archaeologists would find all these items and not know the purpose and not know the reason, but then you would see it end up concentrated in these areas, and it was kind of understood at a point that, hey, they're just straight up collecting them at this point.
I like to think it's the first trading cards.
But
But
seriously, they would move.
Collect them all from different types of chert.
They would move so many items. It is fascinating. And because they were at such a centralized location, they were effectively the trade market.
yeah, yeah, but yeah,
You know what these
basically,
are?
yeah.
You know what those little bladelets are?
No.
Think of it like when you do let's say you want to get like specific chert from a different place, right? But you might not speak the language. But you know there's people who are bringing chert, right? You just lay out the palette. What if it's like a color palette? And you're like, do you have chert of this kind?
the it's the market palette up there, like like
Right,
match your
because you
shade.
can't really describe what kind
It's
of shirt you want to directly import.
it's the little paint color palettes when you go to Home Depot, where it's just all that's like,
Exactly.
which shade of white do you want? The white one.
I mean, think about it.
You're
You're like,
just standing there trying not to strangle the guy.
and then you can like trade it and be like, hey, this is what it looks like when you're out on your travels.
Yeah,
Pull it out.
yeah, yeah. No, it could be like that.
Let
Yeah,
me call Logan real quick.
yeah, no. Go call our resident Stones guy.
But
Yeah,
this is where it is very fascinating because we can tell the region of a lot of the stones and
yeah,
specifically obsidian where it came from, where it was sourced, and we can actually do additional studies to find that. So we have a general pretty good idea of where these things are coming from. Plus, I don't think there's sharks in Ohio.
oh yeah, no, like these
That's
like
what you think.
there
That's
there
what
have
you
been
think. I've seen the Ohio River.
there have been a single
There's all kinds of horrors in there.
yeah,
Oh
there's
no.
single sites that have had things that we've traced that people have traced back to Yellowstone, Louisiana, and the Carolinas, like all in one place in like a Hopewell Mound. So like these people gathered everything onto them, and yeah,
But
that's
they were just very. It's interesting because they were some of the best at a few different things. Obviously, their farming was impressive. It was great skill. They were hunters gatherers. They spent a lot of time on rivers and waterways, so they were very adept at getting fish and trade, which is just phenomenal. And one of the things that was really interesting is a lot of these tribes with so much food surplus, they weren't just letting it go to waste. Oh, no, no, no. They had pottery, and they would store the pots underground, and that would be how they would preserve the food indefinitely. Well, not
yeah,
indefinitely, but
but for a long time, like
yeah, long periods of time.
where we think of building up to build a grain silo, they would dig down and I believe torch the earth so that it would harden, and then they would store their food in that pit,
effectively they would make a root cellar is what it would be, and yeah, they would use it for that purpose, and they would do it for preservation, and it's fascinating because in the earth, in away from the sunlight, those temperatures can hover in the 30s and 40s.
Yeah, and just one thing that like always
I've been underground in some of those cave systems too around Ohio.
Yeah. And like one thing that always gets me is like there is, for whatever reason, this cultural myth that indigenous communities did not understand preservation. That they did not understand that famine could happen and did not understand how to take precautions. It's this weird idea that they would have no idea that lean times could occur and have any solutions for it. Like that's so completely untrue.
As if the bubonic plague did not just happen to these people 100 years prior. Not even really.
It really boils.
Well, actually, yeah.
It just boils down to the dehumanization and intellectualization of these cultures. They intentionally oversimplify them. They intentionally, bastardize them and make them out to be this very rudimentary group. But in reality, they have very in-depth culture, very in-depth facets of life, traditions, and you see that in a lot of this.
Yeah. Yeah, no, because food preparation and preservation, that's prevalent in these sites. It's prevalent in these societies because it's prevalent in all societies. And just, this is just something that like never gets talked about. And I just love being able to talk about it, how people made food, what they did with food. Because honestly, these people made some pretty fun ovens. They had these earthen ovens, which is basically just stacking up little, stacking up a little hollow out of clay, and you got like a little pizza oven that you set a fire in. It's kind of fun. At least, I don't know, it always reminds me of a pizza oven, at least.
I mean, it is, and they used it for a lot of different ways depending on how you would actually build up the dirt. But they actually would make kilns out of earth just by stacking it, and that was in my undergrad. I did take a class where we ended up building an earthen stove and ended up making pottery using clay that we sourced from nearby.
Yeah, like just a little earthen furnace.
Yeah, exactly. So to think and understand that they are very much also just the idea of, hey, we're just going to throw our food in there while we're cooking this up.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Like, it's a great time saver.
Yeah. One of the, this is, and
hold on.
Honestly,
efficiency.
They had a lot of fun things. Their homes were kind of interesting. They were almost like a more permanent form of the teepee, because it is a series of bent poles, but instead of just having skin stretched over it and making a sort of tent, they would use bark and woven mats and have a lot of heavier materials on top as well, for insulation and also for a little bit of a more permanent structure. Because these people, they are semi-nomadic. We gather that up from some of the middens, all their little trash pits. And what they would do is they would live in an area for up to several years until that area began to show signs of exhaustion from human use. Whether it's returning yields on the soil or the beginnings of deforestation, and they would pick up and they would move somewhere else. Every few years, they would start moving on. Local resources would go into decline, they'd move off.
And honestly, that led to a very subsistence way of life where you didn't see large impacts to the local environment because they weren't around long enough to do a whole lot of damage. And one of the things that they would also do a lot is slash and burn agriculture.
Yep.
where they would take a section of forest, burn it down, and in the ashes plant their fields, use the fields for a few years, and then move on and let the forest naturally regrow.
And then they would also just have a renewable wood source too.
Yeah.
Yeah, because they're
So then they don't have to keep cutting down the large, like old trees that, used to grow. They're
So
cutting
it's
down new
just,
growth, taking only what they need.
well, and you look at a lot of indigenous belief systems, they very much believe that they're in the ecosystem with nature, with everything else, and you're supposed to work in concert together. And that idea is just not in the European dictionary. I'm sorry.
No.
It's
and
not.
the idea of moving away once you realize that the deer stop coming this way is
Manifest
not
Destiny is also
something
proof of that.
is not something that really gets done.
Especially when people have the mindset and wonder, why are there so many deer around here? Gee, it's because we drove out all the
Yeah.
predators.
Yep. Now, one of the fun things is the mound sites, the especially the big ones. These were occupied infrequently. They seem to really only have been inhabited for big congregations, for important events and meetings like funerals or weddings or feasts and trade summits, any major religious ceremony. And so these were temporary gathering spots that had significant landmarks that the people would all know and go to and understand.
It's like a neutral ground.
Yeah, it's neutral ground. It's it's where you go to meet everywhere, and that's why a lot of the mound sites, most of the tools there are these very well crafted imports. These are the shark teeth tools. These are Appalachian mica, copper from the Great Lakes, obsidian from Yellowstone. This is where all the fancy tools are, because this is where you use them. This is where you traded for them, and this is where you buried people with them.
You could probably commission them there too. There could have been workshops.
Yeah.
Probably be like, oh yeah, can I get this commission too?
Yeah.
And very much so. I'm sure that they would hire out special artisans. And this is one of my favorite things about looking at developed societies is you start seeing these hyper specializations of craft goods, and what that really details and what that really indicates is, hey, these people don't have to fend for food all day and could actually spend time learning a craft and becoming exceptionally skilled at it, usually meaning that there were some level of currency of trade if someone spent all day in a workshop versus out just hunting for food.
And also, like during the farming season, when the crops are just growing, people have spare time.
Oh yeah, definitely. Like, one of the fun things is, like, with the Hopewell, and I think it carries over into the later Mississippian people, is they decorated their pottery. They had a lot of incisions on it with a lot of stamped lines and whatnot going on it, but they were actually quite minimalist about it. It's it's recurring patterns. It's not like what you see with the Greeks, where they're like trying to make detailed human or animal forms and to depict a scene. They're making they're making patterns on the side of the pottery, and it's very minimalistic. So they're very
But it's abstract.
yeah, they're very Dutch about it. It's minimalism. And it's very it's very fun just seeing that, like, it's because they have all these imports and all these fancy tools and objects from throughout North America, and they decide that instead of putting everything into making super fancy stuff, they decide that useful and nice do
They're
not
very
have to be opposites.
they're very utilitarian.
Yeah, yeah, it's very minimal designs. And it's
It's
it's a nice
functional,
thing. It's a nice thing. Yeah,
and then we're gonna make it look pretty.
yeah. It's
And that's really where you start seeing this change of of society, where again, things no longer become purely utilitarian; they become artistic, they become valuable. It adds an extra depth and layer to it.
Yeah. Oh yeah, definitely. Like the the Hopewell here, we're capable of doing a lot of very detailed and very well crafted artwork. They just chose to focus it on stone and metal rather than the pottery, because they have a lot of soapstone effigy pipes that are shaped to look like animals, and these are very well done. Like these are things that took a single individual several days to make one of.
But see, you say that the pottery wasn't all that detailed, but it was for the time period.
Oh yeah, no,
It was one of the first incidents of mass pottery being used, and even though their designs were minimal with the incisions or with the stamps, it still showed a level of mastery over just the
yeah,
plain earthenware that would be there.
yeah, and just yeah. He's just just with my Greek comparison, the Greeks were making multicolored prints of human beings on their pots at about the same time. And so it's like they
I think
decided
it's
not
more
to
of
do
like
this. They decided they didn't need to make everything look hyper fancy.
I think yeah, it's like it's more just they prefer the abstract.
Yeah,
And
the art
Yeah, yeah,
styles were vastly different, but they were still skilled artisans
yeah,
nonetheless.
yeah. No, they're still very skilled artisans. I'm saying like they chose not to carve detailed alligators into their pottery.
like low relief or
Hmm.
like high
Yeah,
relief stuff
yeah.
too.
They were busy carving those into their stone pipes and making copper fish earrings that some of the images will haunt me to the end of my
I
days.
think it's because in like in the Greco-Roman times, those like the amphorae, the vases, those also were a way to show a sign of wealth, whereas pottery might not have been. Whereas like the pipes though might have been a way to show status. You see what I'm saying? That's why it's like one's like they didn't want it to look pretty because if it's going to get used, hey, cool, nice little decoration, like on a Easter egg bucket that you have lying around. But over the years, like, yeah, it served its function. I didn't need it to be good.
Well, and with a lot of indigenous cultures, tobacco smoking was a major part of it. That culture was very important, so having those decorated pipes was a huge to do, and that was very much an important thing for them.
Oh, yeah, and one of the fun things with the pipes is even though they depicted both, some of them depict local animals. Some of the really really nice ones depict really exotic creatures for Ohio. The really nice ones are alligator pipes.
Hmm?
They look like green alligators.
What are they carved out of?
They're carved out of soapstone, which is it's I've worked with it before. It's a nice you can like drill if you have a copper or a brass pointed anything, you can drill into it.
Oh,
This
so
is
okay.
it's a very workable stone. This is something you could very easily
Where do you
if you have
even
a big
get
enough
it?
chunk. Yeah, I don't know where they got the soapstone from. That never seemed to come up in anything. Yeah,
Like, is it a type of limestone?
No, it's
it's
specifically called soapstone, but it's a harder rock material that has a lot of compressed fine grain into it. It's very good for carving, and it's very good to make things out of, but it is a more
it's
difficult material to work with.
yeah, it's talc layered with magnesium,
Oh,
and it's very workable, but also very it takes a lot of time to do
it's
to
soft, but
do.
like if you're
It
determined.
it's soft, yeah. That's why it's called soapstone. I think if you took it against slate, you could write with it. But yeah, it's a very soft thing. Like they the big ones, the big sellers apparently were frogs, geese, and alligators. And a lot of the frogs and alligators were exotic frogs and alligators, things that wouldn't be found in, say, I don't know, Cleveland.
Yeah.
So it's a lot of fun with that. And they did the same thing with their metalworking. They like to make a lot of jewelry that looked like animals with the metalworking, I believe it was largely copper, but also some iron, silver, gold, and even mica. And they loved making copper fish. Like there was a like everything I came across said showed copper fish earrings as like apparently the number one fashion style.
Well, and it's kind of interesting because a lot of the copper that was sourced here was sourced in Lake Superior, where, ironically, they would make spear points that are made out of copper. That's one of the first things I ever found while I was digging was a copper spear point that was used for a seasonal fishing.
Yeah, yeah, no, they yeah, and just some of those fish. I don't know if they were fishing out creatures of the deep or something, or just someone found those little sandbar fish that bury themselves in the sand and then eat something when it swims over. But some of them just they have that look to me, and it's like, oh my god, this is full Cthulhu.
Why do you think Ohio is the way it is?
Yeah,
But very cool, and again, shows you a lot of the
Or is that Lake
importance.
Erie?
yeah,
It shows you just the importance of what they focused on and what their beliefs were, and you can get a pretty good inclination towards that there.
yeah. One of the fun things though with the Hopewell was how they worked their metal, which is a process called beating and annealing, which basically means they would take a harder object, punch the metal until it was malleable from the from the sheer heating up and working of being hit so many times, beat it into a form, then let it air cool. And it's one of those things where like fire is optional for this, but highly recommended. So they didn't necessarily need to kiln it. For some of it, like the iron, they probably did, but
So you're
for
telling
they
me,
you didn't have to start a fire to make some of the copper jewelry they had.
so you're telling me,
You did not have to smelt.
I mean,
hold on. Well,
I don't want to say that they didn't have smelting capabilities or
Oh,
power, but
oh no, but it's yeah, no, they had all the tools to do it, and they would have had to do it at some point just from the fact that they used iron at various points. But just the fact that you have a way of making metalwork that doesn't require smelting and ironworks and all that fancy stuff with fire and boiling metal.
yeah.
That's fun. That's fun that you have that you can basically Robinson Crusoe your way
yeah,
into
no,
making jewelry.
I'm just imagining just some guy hitting like one day was just very upset and just started hacking away a piece of copper ore with a much harder rock.
Yep.
And it was just like, hey, wait a minute, this actually kind of looks like a fish hook.
Yeah,
He's
and
got
that really is what they would do is they would collect the stone, basically beat it to
Anchor
death with a
management does
harder
wonders,
stone.
guys.
And yeah, they would use fire to kind of warm it up, but they didn't get it hot enough to smelt it. And they would just continuously do that to beat it and shape it. And from there, they would thin it out. They would expand the metal. Like, they got really skilled at this beating and annealing.
They didn't develop like casting.
No,
anything.
yeah,
no
exactly.
casting, no water cooling. All you need to work this magic is a large chunk of a very hard rock and the open air.
And
And
I
you can do this.
and when did Europe get into their copper age?
Well, the Bronze Age ended about 1,000 years before these people.
It's very interesting though because one of the ideas that we talk about a lot in archaeology is this idea of independent invention, and we see it time and time again across the world. One of the most prevalent is independent invention of agriculture. And tying back to Aaron's previous statement a couple of minutes ago about aliens, that's why a lot of people have that misconception is because, well, how do 8 different cultures throughout the world all develop the same concept? Well, you ever come up with a really good melody and you're like, ooh, I came up with the next big hit, and someone's like, that's a Michael Jackson song, or just something along the same lines of, oh,
It's rehashed.
yeah.
It's a remix because they originally tried because the whole mother culture thing that Graham Hancock likes to do.
Yeah.
that was rehashed from the mid 1800s.
Yeah.
We all like we went through a whole time period where we said, no, that's bullshit, and left it behind. Graham Hancock, not an archaeologist, a journalist, by the way,
Hmm.
came along and said, actually, no, I'm just going to say it was here. And also, I'm also going to say it was aliens too,
Yeah.
because why not? You wouldn't let me touch. He wanted to touch all this. Like that's what he is. He's upset that he got told as a child, don't touch these things.
Yeah. Well,
And they're like, they're hiding things from me.
yeah.
And got upset because because he was just a petulant child. Got told no, I couldn't touch this.
Yeah, we can chariot of the gods our way through all of the wonderfully horribly wrong ideas that people have about these things.
Yeah, so like the whole aliens thing is just a rehash of the white supremacy stuff.
Yeah.
They just don't want to talk about that part.
Yeah. Yeah, no. Yeah, because if you were to look at a map of everywhere that people claim aliens built things, you'll notice exactly one continent they never seem to visit.
When the Portuguese hit Southeast Asia, you know where Angkor Wat is and all those other like anchor like kind of like cityscapes.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
They
Thailand,
said
Cambodia.
Alexander must have actually gone further.
Yeah.
Because,
That was their
it
rationale.
can't be these local indigenous people. It has to
Because
be...
remember, Alexander got to the Indus, won won the battle, and wept because he's like, ah, yes, no more land to conquer. It's like,
Yeah.
just go left or like go right, just like a few meters,
Yeah.
couple hundred yards.
Listen,
There's still another world.
Yep. Well, listen, Alexander had to rationalize the concept of people fighting him on giant elephants with the idea that Alexander himself was the first human being to cross the Indus River since the god Dionysus. And oh dear God, has he been busy over here?
I'm telling you, they totally already saw elephants before the Indus. You cannot tell me Xerxes did not have an elephant laying around from
Well,
like some of the other like
they might have had them, but I believe Xerxes would have had African elephants. And this is a different version being wielded very differently
that's
to
true.
terrifying effect.
I still think the most terrifying part is the fact that Hannibal managed to get elephants through the Alps. Of all things, if you are some poor Roman...
He didn't get most of them through.
Yeah, only one survived.
Even still, being someone living on the Italian peninsula, seeing a lone elephant walk through the mountains.
That hasn't been seen since the fucking Pleistocene.
Listen, I'm just going to put it out there. A 3% survival rate is not good.
It doesn't matter. The fact that it wasn't 100% mortality is good.
But you know what else is terrifying?
Oh, no.
Damn, you're really a glass is half full kind of guy
Yeah.
with that, huh?
Yeah. Yeah.
Acceptable losses, casualties, great.
Acceptable losses, 90.
As long as one
survives.
it's like when you play a video game, it's like this certain amount of people have to survive those kinds of missions, and you get like right at the line.
Yeah.
It's like mission success.
Yeah. But you know what's terrifying? Is it's time for our... We've been here for almost an hour, and I don't think we've talked about our headliner yet. The mounds themselves. I think it's time for the mound talk.
Are we finally old enough to get the mound talk?
Yes.
When a mommy and daddy mound love each other very much.
I'm a walk away from the two side by side joke that is inevitably coming from this quarter. I'm gonna walk away before it's made.
Yeah, anyways, the mounds are interesting, and they weren't just like giant hills. They were a bit more complex than that.
Yeah. And that's because the mounds served a variety of purposes. This isn't a single structure type for a single function. These were used for all sorts of things. Now, the most common were burial mounds and platforms for larger structures. These mounds themselves, they are not inhabited. People did not live in or on them. They
Not
were,
like with the Mississippians.
yeah, they were used sort of like if you've if you've ever had to go up like a flight of stairs to get into like like a grand flight of stairs to go into like a courthouse or an old church. These mounds were kind of like that. It was a way to elevate a structure of significance above the landscape so that
Hmm.
you know you had to look up to get it. You had to climb up to get there. It was a way of giving some structures a commanding presence.
Some of them were smaller of, and when we say smaller, it's like 2 to 3 feet, which is still noticeable when you're walking along. But some of them were also massive.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Some were massive, and honestly, they were all sorts of things too. They didn't just have to be mounds like a hill. They could be geometric patterns.
Like the
Uh,
snake.
yeah,
Yeah, the
like the
serpent mound
snake.
is a big one.
Yeah, serpent mound. There's spiral
Is Angel
mounds.
Mounds in Indiana also part of that same culture group?
I think
Uh,
it's a descendant group, but I think it's very similar.
yeah,
Right.
I think Angel might be a Mississippian creation, but I'm not.
Okay.
It's part of the lineage because
Yeah.
the mound thing
I
starts
just
with
couldn't remember.
Medina, goes through like this massive growth phase in the Hopewell, and then kind of has its largest instance under the Mississippians with Cahokia. But yeah, no, they're used for all sorts of things. There's some like burial mound clusters that have a sort of pseudo wall mound surrounding them.
Oh, like a ring
Yeah, like a ring or a rectangle that's broken up at various points to allow
entry.
entry.
Okay.
Yeah, it's this sort of equivalent of like cemetery fencing.
Well, and the cool thing too is a lot of them have astronomical alignments as well
Oh yeah.
that they tie into the stars and into the solstice, and it shows a level of planning and development that's very skilled, very intentional, and it's the intentionality that really gives it a lot of purpose and meaning that I think is honestly really fascinating.
Yeah, and speaking of that meaning, no matter what the function of a mound was, it was and remains a sacred site. This is consecrated ground, no matter what it's being used for. If it is a mound, it was a sacred site.
Hmm.
These are holy
Yeah.
places. Like that, that cannot be stressed enough, especially with some of the things we're going to end up talking about near the end of our little podcast here.
Well, and it's very interesting because we're talking about these sizes, but when you really get down to it, the amount of manpower and labor that's needed to actually build them and to size them up and to compact the dirt to where they're not going to fall apart, it is sizable. It is a lot, and
Because dirt don't settle the way you ever want it to.
no, and it's fascinating because we're still not entirely sure if the work was compensated or not. I believe the general thought is yes, it was done by skilled laborers because of the efforts that were meant and put into it, but we're still not entirely certain.
Yeah,
Honestly, to me,
yeah,
if you'd said like this was like in an area that was already hilly, it would make more sense to like just carve out a hillside like and like build around that. No, they looked at a flat landscape and said, "I'm gonna put a hill here."
Yeah,
yeah,
I
yeah,
I always talk about man's arrogance, like the general and man's arrogance.
And you
And
it
humans just want to do shit. They just want to build stuff. They want to go. Yeah, you see
they
that
want to be a
empty
part of
field?
it too.
I want to put a hill right in the middle of that
Like
field.
if you told me I was gonna be part of like a project to help build like what's the name of that church in Spain that's still being built that like
oh,
started in like the 1600s?
Oh yeah, I don't know the
If you
name of
told
it
me
yet.
I got to be part of that project, I would be stoked. It'd be a huge deal. You're part of history. These people were like, hey, do you want to? Because like you probably didn't even need to incentivize them outside of like, hey, we're all just gonna hang out here, build this, and
Hey,
Yeah,
bro, bring over some beer. We're gonna
Leave.
get drunk and build a hill.
And
Hell
then
yeah!
every year we're gonna come back and party to celebrate us finishing this.
I know the cathedral you're talking about. I found it. It's the uh, Sagrada Familia, and it is set to complete in 2026.
Oh,
Wait, hold on. It's next year.
It's been under construction for 144 years.
Holy shit! No, we have to go see this.
Yeah. Yeah, we got 1 year
That's so cool.
to afford plane
The
tickets to stay.
grand opening of that's gonna be historic.
oh, probably
That
one of
the
the single
Pope's probably
largest
gonna be there.
gatherings in human history. Yeah.
The
Yeah.
Pope is whatever. How many popes have gone through since that thing was constructed to now? Oh my God, Pope Francis might be the first pope to enter that church fully constructed.
Yeah.
That's insane.
It could be. It is insane.
Over 400 years, right?
144.
144.
And
Yeah.
similar to that,
It's like gone under like so many like different reconstruction styles.
Yeah, it's massive. It's terrifying.
and very similar to that, though, a lot of these mounds were built in stages over the scale of time. And at first, they would just build a wooden frame that contained a clay platform, and they would do that, and they would use the platform for ceremonies, cremations, burial. Funerary objects were placed on top of the platform around the burial, and that would consist of copper items, shell, stone, bone. And then over the next couple of months, as more and more people would die, they would bury them alongside them and just kind of keep stacking them up.
Yeah, and like that also speaks a little bit to the overall population of the Hopewell throughout the general area. That a mound would probably only last as a construction for a year or two before being completed and then having to be moved into a new mound for the next wave of people who die.
It's also very interesting to me because one of the big indicators for archaeologists to study cultures and people is looking at burials, because you get an idea of what they thought was important, and seeing the grave goods associated with it is also a really interesting thing. And then also seeing how they effectively are returning to the earth can indicate certain spiritualistic or beliefs about death and returning to the earth.
Oh yeah, like when they were done with these burial mounds, when construction was completed and they were ready to move on to a new mound, they'd set the current one on fire to burn up all the wood and then douse the fire with earth. They'd bury, they'd create that last layer of dirt that all the grass grows onto.
Oh,
Because it's not clay. That's the outermost
right.
layer of these burial mounds. It's tillable soil. It's
Yeah.
you could farm on it if you were completely unscrupulous.
Fun fact, that's how a lot of European settlers ended up discovering a lot of the mounds, and it's why over 95% of mounds in America have disappeared, is because they would basically plow them into nothingness.
Yeah.
They would discover the artifacts and the bones and everything and go, huh, there must have been something here, but over 50, 100 years of plowing, that mound turned into nothing.
Yeah, which
And
is
this
why
is probably
that one,
why everybody has like some sort of like arrowhead. Everybody and their brother has like some sort of arrowhead collection.
To a degree, yeah.
Yeah, but this is also why that one report from 1848 by our little buddies E&E over there is so important, because that's a big part of why we know how much has disappeared, because most of the sites they measured are gone. And so like that map they made is one of the last vestiges of the majority of Hopewell culture, because it proves beyond a shadow of a doubt that these people were in a lot of the places that all evidence of them has been farmed out of existence.
It's just a sad decrease, and it just goes to show, and the burial mounds stand testament to it. The few that remain and have been properly studied show just how extensive their trade networks were. The fact that they were able to trade with the Rocky Mountains, Gulf of Mexico, Atlantic coast, that they had goods from Yellowstone, the Carolinas, Louisiana, Wisconsin. And we start seeing this culture eventually go into decline around 400 CE when we start seeing the mounds and a decrease in size and frequency. They become less common, less as frequent, less big, and coinciding with that, you start seeing a decrease in the technology associated with them as well.
Yeah, a lot of their jewelry starts becoming simpler, less exotic goods. A lot of, the stonework becomes less well made, the pipes are less decorated, the pottery is crude. It's a sign that these people are having to focus more and more and more on immediate subsistence and less on making things nice for themselves.
And this could be for any number of reasons, from intertribal warfare to even climate change, and a change in the growing seasons could impact their food production. And that's really what tends to be the catalyst for a lot of decline, is food.
Yeah, and it probably was food, because we see with their decline and with the dissipation of this culture by about 500 CE is the people are becoming increasingly mobile. They are no longer having year-round settlements that they, live here for 1 to 5 years and then abandon. They are having seasonal settlements where they will live here for 4 to 6 months and then abandon. They become much less they become much more nomadic. And so that's probably a food scarcity thing as opposed to being driven out by warfare.
It's just very interesting. And now what remains is now a part of an area that we call the Hopewell Culture National Historical Park, and that in itself contains 5 different Hopewell sites, which are Mound City, High Bank Works, the Hopeton Earthworks, the Hopewell Mound Group, and the Sipe Earthworks.
Yep, they became a historical park in 1992, and honestly, there was a lot of stuff around this. For one thing, Mound City was the largest collection of mounds surveyed in that lovely little report by our E&E buddies, Squire and Davis. So they're the reason that we knew the full extent of this one site. It's 23 mounds and a perimeter wall. And one of the big things with it is Mound City was a military base during World War One. Camp Sherman, named for a certain Civil War general, was built on top of it.
Good old Texas Sherman.
Yeah, it was an army training camp, and when they put the army training camp on there for World War One, they bulldozed a lot of the mounds because we need to have massive barracks and open room to run our soldiers. Therefore, flatten everything.
Knock it all down.
Yeah. It's just dirt, guys.
Oh, God.
Yeah, and honestly, big part of how we know how big Mound City was is because of the report by Squire and Davis, our little E&E friends. And that's, it's now part of this historic site. It's, it's all this stuff that it is now, but like in 1916, it certainly wasn't anything more than a academic curiosity.
And at that point too, there weren't nearly as many protections in place, nor the National Historic Preservation Act that would have stopped any such development, or at the very least allowed it to have been further studied.
Yeah, this is the era of when the federal government kind of just did what it wanted.
Yeah.
And what it wanted was usually make way for me. Yeah.
And then you also have another site known as the Hopewell Ceremonial Earthworks that's a little less depressing and is very cool because this is a collection of 8 Hopewell sites in the state of Ohio, which includes the National Historic Park sites, the Great Circle, Octagon, and Fort Ancient Earthworks, and became and this I think is honestly a monument and a miracle in itself, is the first UNESCO World Heritage Site in Ohio.
Yep, it was inscribed in 2023.
So also one of the newest.
That's one of the
Oh
newest.
yeah, we
Yeah,
love
like
to see it.
yeah. I believe we ended up talking about it at one point when it did first happen
Yeah.
because it was such a big deal that one, it finally happened, and two, that UNESCO recognized anything in Ohio.
Well, and it's very interesting because of those sites, one of them poses one of the most interesting and controversial case studies known as the Octagon, which the Octagon site is located in the middle of a private country club that uses it as a golf course. They built the golf course on top of and around these earthworks to the point where one of the holes for the golf course is in the center of an earthwork. There's a perimeter wall and it's smack dab in the center.
I hate this so much.
It's super controversial because it poses a lot of different arguments and questions. Firstly, it is a golf course. It maintains ownership over these earthworks that have been deemed to have large-scale historical and cultural values. But then also, they only open up the site to visitors 4 times a year, that they don't have any golf going on and that you can actually go up there. Now, granted, if you played golf, you could, in theory, go and play a round of golf there or become a member and go see it at any time. But
that's the thing. It's the accessibility.
Yeah. For 361 days out of the year, this sacred site is a exclusive entertainment venue.
And it's
then
not...
for 4 days out of the year, the indigenous people are allowed to gently approach the site.
Only 4.
It poses an interesting theory, and while I very much am pro-indigenous, I'm going to play the devil's advocate here just for the sake of having this argument. One of the cases we had, because I've taken a lot of ethics studies classes, especially regarding these topics, where the golf course does, in theory, help preserve the mounds in place. Because they are not actively digging into the mound works, they are keeping them in place, whereas they could have potentially been entirely bulldozed to build a new housing development. And if it was a private contractor doing the housing development, there would be no stopping it.
I know the argument sounds similar to like how people can buy castles. Like if you're rich enough, you can live there because you're probably rich enough to like live in a section of the castle and like have the rest be open to tours and stuff as long as you're the one paying for the maintenance. But that's not what they're doing here. They're profiting off of someone else's culture. Like a group that have living descendants like connected to the area who don't get a say. The other is an American corporation running a golf course.
The part that makes it more
difficult, the epitome of rich.
The part that makes it difficult, though, as an argument, is it's not like it's a mega corporation. It's just the golf course, which I think in itself is a business entity. But
it's still a golf course. It is still a company owning it.
It has been in place for over 100 years at this point. It has been on this site, and to the point where I believe the clubhouse is actually eligible, if not already listed, on the National Register of Historic Places. And there have been conversations and talks to attempt to try to buy out the golf course, make it just a national park, have the golf course take up lands elsewhere and reconstruct themselves and be able to, change up their course layout, design, XYZ. And these conversations have been very contentious and very back and forth because the golf course believes that they're doing a good thing keeping it preserved and keeping it in place while also enjoying it as scenery, whereas a lot of the tribes, to them, it is the cultural equivalent of someone taking like a cathedral like Notre Dame and gutting the inside and putting a basketball arena on the inside and then going, okay, on Christmas and Easter you can go inside for a couple of hours.
Yeah, but in the meantime, we're gonna play laser tag on the pulpit.
Right.
I
Right.
like my joke
Until
earlier.
they figure it out.
Slam
Until they
dunking from the
figure it out,
pulpit.
that's what they're just doing. And that's the
Yeah.
problem. It's the fact that they just don't, like, the other people do not get a say. And also, you're using some of them as part of the golf course instead of like a scenery.
And just also like with the whole argument that this ownership offers protection to the site. So does the fact that it's UNESCO. It's a UNESCO site now. That gives it some bolstering, some standing. Not as much as you would think, but still.
The issue with UNESCO is UNESCO's good for intergovernmental work. So if it's a government-owned facility or property, that would protect it more than private ownership. Because private ownership basically says, yeah, you're on the list, but if they decided tomorrow to sell it to a mega corporation development, they could easily develop that land without any sort of repercussion so long as there is no government funding. That is the catch-22. But if it were a private development, if, Elon Musk decided, hey, this mound area is where I want to build my new mega mansion, there's not much. But there's not much that could be in the way of stopping it. That's where American.
Don't say that too loud. He might hear you and do it.
Yeah, well.
He's stupid. Look what he did to Twitter. What do you think he'll do to like native?
I'm not disagreeing, but I'm just saying, like, despite it being on UNESCO's list, it's not a golden ticket. It's not an overall protection. That's why we
understand that, but private ownership also doesn't guarantee anything.
I guess the point where a lot of people tend to rest their laurels is it's better to have private ownership that wants to maintain the history versus private ownership that could care less.
But that private ownership doesn't have to be for profit or a golf course.
But is that not the most American thing in the world?
No, it's not. It's a Scottish game.
I'm talking about the Americanism of profiting while also enjoying something for leisure.
It's called having your cake and eating it too.
Yeah.
And it's not meant to be a good thing.
Oh, well, let them eat cake.
There you go again.
But it's an interesting thought, and let us know what your thoughts are down in the comments. Like, obviously, I'm here trying to play the devil's advocate. I very much do think the golf course should sell to either the state, which has been trying to buy it, the Ohio Historical Commission, or sell it to the descendant community tribes, which a lot of tribes in the United States have been using their earnings from the casinos that they have on their reservation lands to repurchase old tribal territories. And that I love to see. But do you guys have anything else to add? Otherwise, I think that's a great point for us to wrap up.
Yeah, it's a good point to wrap up. Yeah, the only
Just
other thing to note is that
artifacts.
Yeah, the only other thing to know is that there are a number of other
leave the mounds alone.
Number of other Hopewell sites that are parts of U.S. parks and other such protections now. This is the Octagon is arguably the most contentious cultural site in the United States.
A lot of archaeology grad programs use it as an ethical conundrum because it poses a lot of ethical conversations.
The other one they like to use
no one wins.
Yeah, the other one that, at least for me, was Kennewick Man.
Oh yeah, Kennewick Man is 100% ethics.
Yeah.
But anyways, thank you guys for watching. Let us know your thoughts down below, and we'll see you all in the next episode, which I believe, small spoiler, is going to be the Zulu. So, small little hint there, and we'll see you in the next one.